Scott Wright is the director of the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence, or the LFCE, at the University of Saskatchewan. As such, he is accountable for the LFCE operations and responsible for the strategic growth and development of the research capacity. Scott started his Saskatchewan career in 1983, graduate at the U of S Termunde Farm on pasture rejuvenation and fertilization. He has been a plant breeder with Agriculture Canada in Saskatoon, working on Burlman crested wheatgrass, alongside the Ecovar development program in native grasses with Ducks Unlimited. His forage work included forage management at the Melfort Research Station, and he co-chaired the Western Forage Beef at Lacombe, taking on leadership roles in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Science and Technology Branch, Agri-Environment Services Branch, Research Branch, and Prairie Farm. Dave, we'll just get you to mute yourself there. Thank you. Saskatchewan Agriculture and Alberta Agriculture. Scott is delighted to carry accountability for the LFCE and looks forward to strengthening the partnerships to support the relevant integrated forage and livestock research. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks so much, Sierra. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Can I get a thumbs up from someone if I'm clear?
Yeah, you sound good.
Awesome. Well, that's a bit of an exception. And so I want to tell a little bit of a story coming into this, a little bit of a why is LFCE here? Why is it important? Why should we care from the agrologist perspective, and what kind of those opportunities present? So if I can go back, and we chatted a little bit about in the introduction about the opportunity to do forage-based research way back in the early 80s. And the university at that time saw a real opportunity to connect into the forage and beef side of the industry when the Termunde family came to the university and offered some land, a land base and operating cattle operation in Lanigan, Saskatchewan. At the same time, the Melfort Research Station had been, for a number of years, one of the key sort of federal opportunities in forages in the high producing area, in those thick black zones, with a tremendous amount of work going on the gray wooded soils as well at the Pathlo Research Program. In '95, the feds made a decision that they would not continue the programming at Melfort Research Station, and the livestock by hook and crook ended up moved over to the Lacombe program to be part of a broader forage piece. At that time, there was a real bit of a separation, and there were conversations starting with a few folks whose names you might know, Tim Alexson, crews in the livestock industry that were beginning to really pay attention to the forage need and the forage opportunity. And so I date back the LFCE, the idea behind the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence back to that '95 period when livestock were moved. The province went through a number of iterations with the province and the university went through a number of iterations with their Termunde Research Farm. PAMI ended up as the proprietor, if you will, for a long time, mostly under the continued direction of Dr. Bart Lardner in those days. And so with LFCE, the challenge of what we do with a feedlot in the city at the university had been brought forward by Dr. John McKinnon. And there was some early work done on where that might get sited. The industry at large, and a number of the folks that were around the research world at that point, and the university saw a huge opportunity to begin to put the pieces together in a little more of a cohesive package. And really, a lot of the LFCE conversation came back to, how do we connect all the dots? We do systems research now. We need to be looking at research beyond isolation, really the opportunity to connect those spaces. So the idea with LFCE is it really built out from the standpoint of, how can we look at work that takes us from the soil and water, loved the presentation previously at hand, and interested in how we look at those spaces. So functionally soil, functional water, the microbiome associated with that, and the important microbial activity that sits underneath it. From there, the interspace between those and the plant community, the plant population come up. Yep.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment.
Sure.
We have Dave who has currently overrode your screen share at the moment, and we're seeing his screen instead of yours.
Well, that's a pretty screen. Let me fix that. And relay.
There
we
you go.
got
Thank
it back?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, and so we're built with that conversation of the pieces coming together, of really trying to connect the dots that take us all the way from the water-soil interface, the microbiome associated with it, that interface with the plant world, and the opportunity in what happens at that space. Plants and plant breeding, surrounding with forage crops, and now taking those plants and putting them into the interface with animals. And most of you on the call will be very comfortable with the idea that within the livestock industry, there's a number of realms that come together. There's the cow-calf that produces that calf on the ground. That calf either turns into replacement heifers or replacement females, or it goes into the feedlot conversation to make the delicious steak that sits on your plate. And so a tremendous amount of the effort in LFCE was to look at how we can connect those spaces, how we can create facilities that would allow us to move from a cow-calf operation, look at all aspects around that cow-calf forage interface, animal health, disease, animal welfare, those connects all coming together, and looking at that all the way through that gate to plate conversation. And so the basis of LFCE was on that. The pieces that we got to put together were the feedlot that was transferred from north of the university down to south of Clovette, which is really the core, if you will, or the head office space for Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence. The cow-calf work that was being done primarily at Termundi, and again, think of Dr. Lardner and the programs that evolved out of that, Kathy Larson, the whole crew that was very, very strong in that space. The opportunity to bring that from Termundi location to much closer to the city, easier access for students, easier access for researchers, and really the chance to connect those dots between cow-calf and into the feedlot space. And so those components came together, and at the same time, the Western College of Vet Med was looking at what was the Goodale Farm and the veterinary research that, again, ties directly in with that system of programming, that system of production that we know as a livestock production system. And so the Goodale Farm was included in that team. The Goodale Farm started as an intensive research facility, and I'm going to put it that way. And we continue to look at both how we've used those land spaces and continue to drive out on a more intensive research program. I'll talk some more about that. So really the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence represents multiple locations, primary areas south of Clovette, where the feedlot area and the forage cow-calf units are based, along with some grazing pasture set aside for intensive research programming, as well as crop production and production into the feedlot side. I want to step back again and talk about how all this operation gets funded in the process. And so both the College of Veterinary Medicine and the College of Ag Bio are key participants in the operational funding. And in essence, both of them drop in about 20% of our operational funding. 50% of our operations funding comes from primarily the product that we produce relative to what's happening. Sorry, and I'm going to go back. We've got the university at 20%, 10 and 10 from the two colleges, the province at 20% through ADF, and 10% of the resources come from the difference between the productivity we would normally have in that livestock operation and the cost of doing research. So we call it research user fees. About 10% of our annual operating comes from that. So it's an interesting model that drives out research and creates research capacity. The vision for it, current slide, internationally recognized as a collaborative research facility bringing together scientists and stakeholders across those sectors. And really it's about facilitating work. So in many ways, I say we're a facility. Our job is to provide research readiness for our researchers and really enable research programming that, again, connects those dots, adds some ripples, creates that capacity. Student training, extension, knowledge mobilization are all key parts of it.
Hey, Scott, Can I
Yes.
just interrupt you for a second?
Of course.
Your screen, for some reason, the slides are not advancing. I'm just wondering, are you in presenter mode? And because what I see on the screen is the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence, our mission. So you have the
Correct.
mission statement.
And it is advancing where I want it to be. You betcha.
Oh, okay. Okay,
We're
thank
on
you.
it in that, for sure. And so vision we've talked about, mission is really around facilitating innovative change, really promoting sustainability, quality, profitability, environmental stewardship along that whole line from soil all the way through. And so what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what we are, where we are. I'll allude to some of the research programming that's going on and spend just a touch of time there around what key pieces are in play. Begins to look like as we think of the LFCE. And so fundamentally, we're built on that partnership. It's a connectivity between the colleges. Engineering was a strong component as we moved it forward. And really, we pulled all the pieces together and said in 2018, this is the Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence. Funding was provided both from federal and provincial coffers, opportunities from industry, significant investment from industry, and that's why we talk about it in many ways being a co-owned facility. Really, again, what we're looking to do is connect the dots with research capacity that's as high a caliber as we can possibly go there. The kind of work that we set out to do, cost-effective herd management, fundamentally, what do we do in this era with reducing cow-calf numbers? What do we do in this era where we're seeing more and more both economic and environmental challenges come into the process? And really, how can a facility like this work with the researchers and research teams to ensure that we're targeting, managing input costs, managing environmental pieces, analyzing every stage of the cattle production chain, and working our way through with that. Ensuring that when research is done narrow and deep, that it fits into the connectivity, it fits into the other parts of the chain, and we recognize the ability to see those animals all the way through. In lots of ways, this has become about how do we provide science-based answers not only into the industry, but also into the consumer and consumers' questions as well. It's about the soil to supper conversation. We continue to look for what data is needed, what are the key data opportunities and the needs to be able to move us forward as an industry, as a province, and as a prairie opportunity or a prairie component. I love this piece around a smaller environmental hoofprint. The feedlot, about 1,500 head, plus or minus, was set up to be able to go into a green scale farm operation or a green field. So our feedlot provides a picture, if you will, of the environmental impact of feedlot over time. The engineering department under Dr. Terry Fonstad got extremely proactive. We had sensors built in underneath that space in many ways, shapes, and form that allow us to look at water flow and nutrient flow, penetration below those pens, below the feedlot processes, and inform things like intensive livestock operation planning into the future. Currently, our ILO siting regs are based on swine information, swine data primarily, and this presents a huge opportunity for us to begin to help Saskatchewan move forward around some of those questions and components. We come back frequently to what are the key ways of reducing that environmental footprint. Best practices, the opportunity to move those research results into a collection and begin to move those forward are really part of the target and part of the outcome. Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence, the governance structure really comes back to a strategic advisory board with 5 producer members on it. They help us look at some of that strategic direction. What is the direction we need to go? Not operationally so much as long-term sort of strategic priority and opportunity. Note that we do not have researchers on staff. This is the researchers of the university here primarily, with interest from federal researchers and provincial, neighboring provinces and beyond. Fundamentally, when we talk about how can we how can we push research in this direction? For us, it's how do we put the capacities together in a way that really makes this happen. Maurice, I noticed you were on here. We touched briefly on regenerative agriculture, and I'm going to come back to that concept. As we look down the road, our strategic advisory board has really said 5 things. On one hand, those environmental goods and services, that environmental resilience is one cornerstone. For us, on the other side, is Indigenous relations, the relations to the people of this land, right? In between are things like, really, we've gone from a research outcome to dirt, to discovery, to innovation, to opportunities around research, and what are the technologies and components we need to put that together. Those are all the component outcomes that our advisory board is challenging us to ensure we drive research into. The larger pieces are out there, but it's not just about research. This is about practical hands-on application, the opportunity for students to be working with some of the newest technologies, handling facilities, low stress handling facilities, both on the cow-calf side, feedlot side, and quite frankly, we're eyeballing what's happening on our bison facilities and the capacity for those bison to be handled. It's about working with larger landscape and larger animal numbers located within reasonable location to Saskatoon, and then building in the students underneath that. As part of the story, I often reflect that I was one of the first grad students at Termunde under Dr. Roger Cohen way back when. The experience that the students have in their learning, their opportunity both for academic learning, for their research work, for lab work, and frankly for hands-on and understanding what the reality in a livestock operation is, those are the things that they'll take with them. They're the things that they'll come back to. And openly, I look at every student that comes through as they're going to be the next deputy minister that we're going to be looking to for sustainable funding into the future. So practical teaching and training, and really evolving or advocating for a strong relationship with the students and the student learning capacity. In lots of ways, this is about trying to link people to knowledge. And so we say clearly that LFCE doesn't do extension. We are looking at knowledge transfer methods. The extension is primarily done by the Saskatchewan Ag folks, Ministry of Ag Extension team. That's where we see that information going. And then through the researchers' dissemination, again, I'm not going to speak for Dr. Greg Penner or Dr. Bart Lardner. I'm not going to take their research and put it out there. That's their ownership of the work that's being done. We want to create awareness of the work that's there. We want to help put the pieces together relative to making that work happen. And you bet we're even advocating on their behalf in many ways to be able to create those connected research programs and be able to build there. All things to all people, perhaps, but remember the ideas behind LFCE started back about 1995 and where we go forward. And so as we think forward, I want to talk to you about the projects that are on the cusp. If I back up just a smidgen, there's a tremendous amount of these good, solid, ongoing industry relevant programs. I mentioned Dr. Lardner, I mentioned Dr. Penner. Gabe Ribeiro is the new beef chair. Tremendous capacity in the feedlot world, doing some tremendously interesting things around feed efficiency. Animal behavior relative to that comes more from Diego out of the Western College of Vet Med. So there's the traditional scientists. In the old Goodale place, our native hoofstock center where 80 bison cows are, a huge piece of research around genomics and the genetic components that make up our traditional bison herd, really helping, if you will, helping continue the bison world beyond. Those are practical projects. They're ones that we know of. They're ones that are traditional. And again, my invitation to you is to make sure you're connecting directly to the researcher on those projects. The pieces coming forward, again, that we see some real, some opportunity where we don't currently have traction, is the way I'm going to put it, sits into this space. And there's a Canadian Foundation for Innovation grant that's allowing us to build some capacity that really represents this exciting opportunity. In the beef cattle genomics and phenomics side, what are the desirable traits in livestock? How do we select appropriately for them? How do we provide tools that make it practical handy and applicable? And what are the tools that are really going to help us do some things to be able to get there? So ranging from the commercial, the excellent commercial work that's currently underway with folks like One Cup AI, working with phenomics and understanding picture, if you will, camera sets that allow producers to understand whether they do have to get up at 3 a.m. for that calving or not. Understanding, articulating, if you will, that animals are gaining or not gaining based on the conditions that are around them. Using the tools that allow the industry to become a little more efficient in the process, both production, economics, and environmentally as a way of getting there, and providing a better space for the producers that are working here. So to me, this is a really key and exciting opportunity. If we think of the precision livestock agriculture that we can glance across the road in the swine industry or glance across the road into the poultry industry, we see opportunities to really be able to pull those pieces together. Many of the traits that we're after, and I always like the vision of that calf is coming off pasture. We have the ability to assess it through traits like this and understand whether it has opportunity to gain 5 pounds a day in a feedlot and continue that production cycle, whether it has the opportunity to produce cows that allow us 12 or 15 generation of calves, longevity in the herd, critical efficiency in bringing the cows, bringing that calf product out and bringing it to market. So this beef cattle genomics and phenomics is to me a huge opportunity to look at how we interact with the beef industry, how we recognize the limitations, the challenges, the components that are facing us around that beef industry right now, and really what that capacity looks like, and really beginning to kind of drive that out. And so what we're looking to do on the genomics phenomics component is look at phenotypes on small numbers of animals, look at things like those reproductive phenotypes, the phenotypic capacity to be where we want to be, validate on some larger animals, and really kind of bring in some of the initiatives that are there. So a big component of this integromes lies within that opportunity for the beef cattle industry. When we continue to the next piece, it's around the microbiome, and I mean, I was looking at cameras coming on yesterday and thinking that there's a number of us that have come through the same space where we've gone from understanding microbiology from plating an individual species on that plates to the genetic components, to the genetic makeup of those animals. What microbiome allows us to do is establish some strong connections, if you will, between the microbiology that's happening, be it within the animal in the rumen, be it in the uterus, around the reproduction side, frankly, be it around the feces on the animal health side, nasal exudates. There's so many ways we can begin to look at this and use this tool in ways that totally drive the industry forward. Think, if you will, for example, around what the healthy microbiome is in that animal interface, and I'm going to move it further, nitrogen fixing at the soil plant interface, so that root zone. And so the opportunity to build microbiome pictures of microbiology all the way through the system, not just in one place or form. Look at the role of that microbiome in the health of the animal. Understand where the health challenges are truly emerging and how we can go that next step with really driving that piece out. A huge component of this is being able and the need to manage data at a scale and state that we've not had to do before. The bioinformatics side means handling massive amounts of information when many of us are still struggling to make sure we get cell surface. And so identifying the challenges all the way from connectivity right into application to be able to look at how we can use these tools and move them forward. I always maintain that in this integromes project, 3/4 of it's a direct benefit and direct opportunity into our livestock industry and livestock capacity. The third quarter that I want to touch on around this integromes project is around diagnostic solutions. chute-side diagnostics that let us understand not only what is the disease treatment relationship and what should that look like, but where there are opportunities and challenges around things like antimicrobial resistance. Sorry, did someone want to talk for a minute? No, perfect. And so in this space, this really is, think if you will, and I'm going to talk about an genomic assets program more from Cheryl Waldner's perspective. These are the opportunities that this kind of a center really allows us to move forward through. As we talk about antimicrobial use, what are the right drugs in the right situation for the right challenge? What should we be assessing both for saving coin, saving dollar, reducing input cost, advancing animal health in a major way, and at the same time, reducing the longer term ripple effects, reducing antimicrobial resistance, understanding where those challenges occur, and really being ahead of them, understanding, for example, that steer in the chute with a little bit of nasal exudate carries resistance genes for standard penicillin. Knowing that we've got to go elsewhere to provide a responsive treatment for that animal based on these kinds of tools. So if I can leave you with the thought on the Intergromes project, the opportunity for really moving forward, the Intergromes project allows us to do things with the livestock industry that we've not been able to really move forward with some pretty exciting things that have happened around things like the Canadian Beef Breeds Council, the amalgamation of data now, that back to that bioinformatics challenge, the amalgamation of historical data. Now we've got an opportunity to really overlay that as an opportunity for the industry, moving it forward along the lines that we're really trying to drive out. The fourth quarter on the Intergromes project relates to bison. Primarily, it relates to the understanding of the bison genome, the opportunity and recognition that we've gone from somewhere between 30 and 60 million head to as low as 700 head somewhere in our history. The opportunity here is to ensure that we capture that genetic variability, to ensure that all of the genetics available to us in this livestock area are available for a future bison population, reducing some of the sensitivity, if you will, to livestock disease and livestock disease interaction, and really representing an opportunity in that component. We have a threatened Canadian species. We're working with tentatively isolated populations. Epidemic disease coming from the livestock side are really helping us do that. And there's a process around hybridization. Many of the animals that we work with have some degree of commingling between the plains type and the woods type bison. So the research areas here are some of those same genomic tools that we're looking at in cattle or other livestock being applied into the bison space and that opportunity to ensure that we've secured the genetics, the genetic variability that's currently available in the bison population. The opportunity to have that both from wild and captive animals and ensure that that's available for future capacity. Understanding those components of host resistance, of the ability of the animal to force off or reject, if you will, livestock disease as a capacity to really move us forward. And finally, the genome biobank is a concept that talks about securing those genetic materials in ways that can be used both for science and for industry into the future around this program. I really highlight this Intergromes project as I think it's one of the real intriguing components of moving forward with Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence and where we can go. I want to chat that third quarter that talks about some of the genomic components. Dr. Cheryl Waldner is running the Genomic Assets Project at Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence now. Again, it provides that opportunity to really take a long, hard look for the industry and try and preserve the effectiveness of current antibiotics, preserve the effectiveness of future antibiotics, and really represent a way to pull this forward. And so the genomic assets for livestock is that antimicrobial stewardship systems, and it's based on understanding. So anyone who happened to have gone through our feedlot last year would have shaken their head at the mix and match of animals that we brought in specifically through the feeding process. That was exactly to create the kind of microbial challenge that we're looking for, disease challenge that we're looking for, to be able to move forward with projects like this. Eventually, and really where this one is being driven out, this is about providing diagnostic solutions to support that antimicrobial stewardship work. Cost-effective tools based on the metagenomic and RPA technologies, the opportunity around RNA and identification, and making them sort of timely and evidence-based. It's no good to produce tools that won't be used. It's no good to produce tools that the industry will not see its way to be able to affect their own production with. And really, this begins a key place. And so it becomes, if I can put it this way, treatment choices for groups of animals. Reducing some of the upfront antibiotic use, reducing some of the preloading as we've got animals coming into a mix and mingle state, and really opportunistically driving this out. And so, again, these represent some of the forward thinking, the less practical hands-on conversation in some ways, and yet bringing together more advanced science opportunity to deliver it into an industry that sees that space and that opportunity. And so I want to move now to a little bit of the horizon. What are the places coming forward? The recent hiring of Dr. Kellen, really in an integrated forage management utilization capacity. Again, a tremendous partnership of industry, of research components, BCRC, ADF, really looking at what we need as an industry across Western Canada. The economic lens, that piece that we always bring forward. I'm sure many of you here know Kathy Larson. Kathy's been an incredible and integral component of doing the economics of beef production for us. In fact, she was one of the past interim directors of Livestock and Forage Center of Excellence. And what happens is that every project comes forward, we try and take that economic eye and really move it forward. We've argued, we've advocated in industry and with potential donors that support for that simple economic production, economic capacity is critical. Absolutely needed for us to be able to move LFCE forward and really sort of create that connection of science and economics in the space that we really want to go to. Our principles and priorities. So the conversation that comes with we're in a space where often both our facilities, our animals. Go ahead, David.
Sorry, Scott. I was just going to type a question there and I clicked it too late. So feel free to keep going and I will ask at the end.
All right,
yeah, I
thank
think
you.
we'll do questions at the end there.
Okay, sounds good. And so again, beyond the horizon, we've got a number of interested parties on how we look at additional facilities, at building capacity. I mentioned the economic side of things, and we really want to build that capacity up as part of our component. The intensive research herd, and so we've talked about having 50% of our annual operating funds coming from the production of our own animals. There is a type of research, more intensive, that really eliminates the ability to bring those animals either back into the food chain or into capacity. Some of it's iterative research, whereby you create findings based on a treatment for follicular development, for example, and immediately in that same animal want to move forward. So those kinds of intensive research, multiple samplings of an animal on a daily basis, those are the kind of programs that we want to be able to provide and yet balance off the sustainability of the center economically and over the long term. So the opportunity to build a research herd that's much more, that's subject to more intensive use, and we don't rely on economic outcome as part of it. On the land-based side, we're light, and I'm going to say that openly. We're 400 cows, 100 buffalo. We're making plans around what the horse side of the business needs to be, and we're a feedlot of significant content and significant numbers of animals as we put that through. And so We see challenges. We see challenges from the intensive grazing program. I'm going to talk some other pieces around that. We see challenge from that land-based piece, and we're constantly keeping our eyes open on what that means for us from a sustainable side. The feedlot capacity, our feedlot is forward booked at this point. And I want to step back half a step. And the research cycle that takes us here is really where part of our challenges occur. So industry talks to our researchers. They have a brilliant idea for the next conversation. And Jeff, you know, you're not allowed to start throwing rocks yet. They have a brilliant conversation on what needs to be done. They agree with it. They put in a letter of intent. A year later now, right, we're going to full proposal. And a year after that, we're actually coming back and saying to the facilities, hey, we need to be able to access this process. So for us, that delay from brilliant idea to implementation in a research program, that lag really creates an interesting space. Conversations with a group of researchers, or sorry, a group of producers last night who were saying, you know, you guys aren't keeping up on this cover crop, polycrop world. You know, we're wanting to do 21 species mix, and you're back to moving from simple mixes to 10 or 15 pieces. And that's a perfect example of where the industry nimbleness often can get us ahead of the science and the challenges that we've got to have in our own system to be able to come back and address that. So that lag creates some interesting opportunity and really adds to the challenge that we've got there. Perennial rotations are long-term. Some of the little sort of dryland or drought conversations that I'm going to talk about coming up really talk about evaluating over 8 and 10 and 20-year periods and how that works. And so with a limited land base, we're doing intensive grazing studies, and I'll use, for example, a grazing systems project that allows us to compare perennial stands versus annual stands. It does it systemically, and he's able to look at water and water cycling, at greenhouse gases, at soil carbon, greenhouse gas emission, animal performance, and animal emissions all stacked into the same project. Well, to do that for 3 years under a normal funding regime doesn't give you the kind of data that really provides us the ability to provide data back to the consumer on what this industry does and how that works. And so to me, there's a huge opportunity there that says, you know, longer term rotations, longer term capacity to really be able to drive some of these pictures out. And now we can really begin to have talks on the effect of increasing temperature and increasing drought and those kinds of components. And so these areas are all sort of areas of future consideration and challenge as we continue forward. And so I wanted to nudge us forward a little bit around some of the emerging or the areas that we hear consistently. The dry challenge, the drought challenge, has been an interesting one. And so 2 years ago, you all know the challenges that the province kind of came through with a broad drought condition. Where are we now? If you're looking at Environment Canada information at all, the pieces that came out for the next month say 78% of our agricultural area is under moderate to severe drought watch or drought conditions currently. We begin to lay that into what else is out there. And if you don't get excited about the drought watch and the drought pieces on Environment Canada, it's worth going back and looking through the changes on the droughtiness of our current situation. I want to overlay that with shrinking land base, particularly for the crop and the livestock side of the industry, and the opportunities for interfacing with pasture, permanent pasture, and even long-term native grass opportunities. If we look at the combination of what's happened with a continuous nutrient draw and changing temperatures, Dr. Paul Jefferson's got some really interesting current information that continues to pop out. 16, the information that he brought forward recognized that from 1980 to 1990, our 10-year average for hay production was about 2.2 tons. If we look at 2012 to 2022, that was about 1.7 tons. And one of the papers that Paul's popped out in 2016 really talks about, we're seeing a reduced sensitivity, if I can put it that way, to precipitation. In other words, as precipitation increases, our yield responses are not as vibrant as they once were in time, and relates that to some of the temperature challenges. And so from LFCE's perspective, right, our producer group is saying, what can we do on this ongoing dry situation? And so as part of this, what I wanted to do was kind of take a little peek at where some of the national and international work is on drought and the drought opportunity. And so Drought Monitor, this is the one that popped out as of end of February, recognizing again, and their own numbers suggested 78% of the agricultural area in moderate to severe drought, creating challenges for us for yet again the third year of how we move forward. Because so when we look at work that's been done around drought and forage crops, drought in the livestock industry, early work way back in 2004, guys like Don Kirby and the crew, North Dakota, were bringing those conversations out and recognizing that multiple years may provide progressive or ongoing challenge to that land. And again, I think the 100 or so people on here are saying, yeah, drought reduces quality, reduces quantity, can change the energetics, can add a little bit of protein. And those are the sort of basic pieces that come forward. But as we start to dig into that, as we think about for our livestock industry in the future, how does that droughtiness really begin to come forward? So I pulled sort of some, again, reasonably current projects that are reflective of what's happening. In the June 22 paper, Batbar's work, and it really comes out of his PhD thesis, over 4 years of drought, recognized that they had 3 years of decline and a fourth year where productivity showed some recovery, if I can put it that way. The impact was more on composition than it was on productivity. That didn't impact a whole lot on the quality side, but what I'm getting at is our fundamental simple models of relating precipitation to yield as a direct linear, curvilinear relationship. We are scratching our heads. It's becoming less predictive, if I can put it that way, and introducing new challenges to really how we look at those future opportunity or future needs. Species composition more than productivity across the northern temperate grasslands, that January 22 publication. And again, Ed Bork, Batbar, those of you who don't know Ed Bork, he'll be presenting here at the APAS conference coming up next week. Huge opportunities to look at some of those precipitation interactions here on the prairies. And I wanted to reach out a little bit more. I wanted to have a look. So Japan beginning to talk about decadal scale, 10-year drought periods, more closely approximating some of the conversations that are coming out around drought and the impact of it here. Again, their take homes, instead of it being a normal model response, instead of them being able to predict that continuous decline based on precipitation, there's a very interesting piece here that comes back and says, it really depends. The response to drought is becoming very dependent on grassland type, depending on the type of material that are there, right? That limits or affects our ability to predict a drought response. And again, the folks sitting here are going, gee, that's a surprise. We really knew all along that whether you've got deep-rooted legumes, deep-rooted grasses, fibrous or taproots, all of those pieces come together to affect, but all of them come together to create a challenge for us in really predicting a way forward and an opportunity. Right, so we reached out and had a look around a little further. On the Australian side, again, fairly current research dropping out January 2023, looking at both above ground and root plasticity information. This is our old friend Tall Fescue. Some of the work they were doing really relates to that, and under drought conditions have demonstrated change in root capacity. So going down and continue to drag on, creating intense rooting depth, or more rooting depth as a result of some of the drier conditions. The roots might have been smaller in diameter, but again, they were occupying soil volume that was going down further. And so here we have plant response, plant plasticity. And again, I'm bouncing around a bit, but when we look at what was happening doing drying and warming, those two components coming together again, temperature and the precipitation conversation, right? We lost, or that they lost, sorry, some of that association, some of that water drops down above ground, it's going to reduce in terms of its above ground biomass, right? Root trait plasticity and below ground carbon reserves are heavily affecting what's happening above. This was the study that also touched on something that had come out early years in Saskatchewan, that nutrient, nitrogen nutrient, and Jeff Shano is going to jump on this one, right? Under different drought conditions, nitrogen effect, the nitrogen response varies. But way back in '83, we talked about the idea that nitrogen levels have a water sparing effect, or actually increase the water use efficiency in ancient old crested wheat smooth brome grass stands. I'm going to come back to that. Again, the response longer term, it depends on a number of states. And so I love this one. This came out of Mongolia, across the Mongolian plateau. And this bottom graph, again, annual precipitation, right? Where are we in Saskatchewan? Somewhere in about here. For us, super dry land precipitation kind of drops down here. And yet here they are in demonstrating that the more complex plant systems were demonstrating yield above ground productivity, independent of sort of those harsh drought conversations. In other words, in the driest year, those plants were fighting it through to still give some kind of productivity. Over the wettest years, we're not seeing precipitation is really driving out the kind of yield jumps that we would expect. In other words, again, our response to drought challenge really has an awful lot of it depends conversations. And so I want to leave you with this thought and then kind of open up for conversation and question. As we look at exploring and mitigating the drought question, and this to me is the number one question that industry has sort of hammered on us at LFCE in the last while, how do we prepare? How do we mitigate? How do we address and direct our opportunities? And so to me, talking about the functionality or the quality of the forage and the quantity of the forage that we're putting out there, be it pasture or be it hay. The variables that we come back to are not just precipitation and temperature, it's their amounts, it's their timing, it's their intensivity, it's what's come before, it's how long it's been there, and those all become sort of key questions we begin to ask and drive out. Regenerative agriculture questions don't get answered until we come back to understanding these longer term impacts and effects. The stand composition, what's in the stand, what's making up the stand that's in front of us, both in terms of its current state, how did it get there, what's happened to get it to this current state, and what's the trajectory of the stand in terms of its functional viability, quality, quantity, opportunity moving forward. On the utilization side, how are we managing? How are we taking? How are we cutting or grazing that space? Both in terms of what currently we're doing, what the historical utilization has been, and really the trajectory. What's the change that we're seeing as we move forward? And I want to drag out that utilization a little bit, because we're seeing in the literature clearly that commingling of the dreaded nitrogen, again, with drought response, precipitation response, temperature sensitivity as a result of those changing parameters. And so as we think about systems again, putting the dots together, connecting the dots, making all of the components come together, these are the kind of studies, as we're looking at LOIs, Jeff, These are the kind of concerns that we want to take in, overlay, and continue to be able to move forward. And so I want to leave that up for half a sec, pause and invite any questions along the way. David, go for it.
David, did you still have a question?
Oh, Scott
Yeah.
actually answered my question as he talked on. So that's, I just had to be patient. So thank you.
Sierra, just, do you have your microphone covered up? We can barely hear you.
How about now? Is this better?
Oh, yeah, much better. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
I apologize, everyone, for giving a quiet introduction. I didn't see the comments till the end, so I put the old headphones on so you can hear me better. So sorry about that, Scott. Is there any other questions for him? We have a comment from Ross McDonald saying the response to drought also impacted by local wetland drainage was excellent. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thanks, Ross. Good to see you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, so with that, I just want to say thank you, Scott, for speaking today. Appreciate you coming out. Otherwise, now we will take a short break for lunch, and at 12:20, Dale will be taking over again for